Welcome to Money Moves in Silence. This is where we reveal the empires you were never meant to see. You know the name SHEIN, the brand, flooding your social feeds with fashion at prices that seem unreal. Millions scroll, click, and buy, fueling a machine worth over $100 billion. SHEIN moves faster than Amazon, outpaces Zara, and rewrites the rules of retail. But behind the endless scroll is a story of secrecy, speed, and data-driven power. This isn't just about cheap clothes. It's about a founder who stays hidden, a business model built on algorithms, and a company changing how the world shops. We're going beyond the glossy posts and low prices to ask, how did SHEIN rise so fast, and at what cost? The story of SHEIN is the story of modern business, where speed is king and data is currency. It's a tale of ambition, innovation, and secrets. This is the empire you never saw coming. It's already here, shaping the world in ways we're only starting to understand. Let's pull back the curtain. Welcome to the real story behind SHEIN. SHEIN's story is one of silence and speed. It built a $100 billion empire in the shadows, quietly capturing the world's attention. The brand is everywhere, but its inner workings are a mystery. Who's behind it? How do they launch thousands of styles daily? How are prices so low? These questions go beyond business. They touch on ethics, labor, and the future of global trade. We'll trace SHEIN's origins, its revolutionary supply chain, and the algorithms that power it. But we'll also reveal the human cost, the factories, the workers, and the allegations of unethical practices. This is a story of success, and a warning about unchecked power. The silence is over. SHEIN's story starts in Nanjing, China, 2008. Chris Xu, also known as Sky Xu, wasn't a fashion mogul but a digital marketing expert. He launched SHEIN, selling wedding dresses online, learning the ropes of global e-commerce. Xu wasn't just selling dresses, he was studying data, payments, and shipping, building the foundation for something bigger. While others focused on products, Xu obsessed over process and real-time consumer data. He saw the future, not top-down trends but instant response to digital demand. The big brands ignored the internet's potential. Xu made it his entire business. From a small online shop, he quietly built the blueprint for a global revolution. Xu operated in the shadows, not hiding but simply unnoticed. The world of fashion was about to be disrupted, and had no idea. The digital age had found its architect, and he was just getting started. By 2015, Chris Xu rebranded SHEIN to SHEIN and shifted from wedding dresses to global fast fashion. The strategy outpaced Zara and H&M by making speed the ultimate weapon. Where others took weeks, SHEIN aimed for days, sometimes hours. The secret? Data, not designers. SHEIN's system scraped the internet for emerging trends, turning the entire web into its inspiration board. Algorithms replaced guesswork, predicting what customers wanted before they knew it themselves. The company became less a fashion brand, more a tech powerhouse. The product wasn't just clothing, it was the algorithm itself. In 2015, SHEIN declared war on the old guard. Fashion was no longer dictated by designers, but by data. The rules had changed. The algorithm, wrapped in fabric, was born, and the industry would never be the same. SHEIN's real power? Data as designer. Every click, search, and scroll is tracked, turning millions of users into trend forecasters. The company knows instantly what's hot in Brazil, France, or the US, and acts on it. Designers don't create, they execute the algorithm's instructions. Thousands of new items drop daily, each a calculated bet on what will sell. Art is stripped away. Fashion becomes a science of data points. Browsing SHEIN is like scrolling through the internet's fleeting desires made real. It's not a curated collection, it's a mirror of online chaos. SHEIN doesn't just follow trends, it predicts and monetizes them at scale. The algorithm is the new fashion icon. SHEIN's final innovation? The micro-bulk supply chain? Traditional brands gamble on mass production. SHEIN bets small, fast, and often. Instead of 10,000 units, it starts with 100-200, produced by agile workshops in China. New items are listed instantly. Data decides what lives or dies. If a style sells, production ramps up. If not, it's gone. No waste, no risk. The result? SHEIN's unsold inventory is as low as 2%, compared to 25-30% for rivals. This isn't about sustainability, it's ruthless efficiency. The company offers endless choice, minimal waste, and relentless speed. SHEIN isn't just selling clothes, it's selling a perfectly optimized system. The illusion of infinite variety powered by data, the micro-bulk model is the engine of SHEIN's dominance. fashion, redefined for the digital age, and the world is still catching up. By the year 2022, SHEIN had transcended its origins as a Chinese e-commerce curiosity. It had morphed into a global force of nature, a retail juggernaut whose scale and speed were unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. The numbers were simply staggering, painting a picture of explosive, almost unbelievable growth. Its annual revenues were estimated to be somewhere between $32 and $50 billion, a figure that placed it firmly in the same league as long-established industry titans. The company's valuation peaked at an astronomical $100 billion, a figure that was not just impressive, it was a statement. It made SHEIN more valuable than its two biggest fast fashion rivals, Zara and H&M combined. This wasn't just success, it was a complete reordering of the retail hierarchy. This financial dominance was a direct reflection of its expanding physical reach. SHEIN was no longer just shipping to a few select markets, it had become a truly global entity, delivering its products to over 150 countries. From the bustling cities of the Americas, to the fashion-conscious capitals of Europe, and across the diverse markets of Africa and the Middle East, the distinctive SHEIN packaging became a common sight on doorsteps. The brand had successfully built a logistics network that could bypass traditional retail infrastructure entirely, creating a direct line from its workshops in China to individual consumers anywhere on the planet. The world had become its marketplace. The promise to the customer was simple yet profoundly powerful: instant gratification on a global scale. A shopper in a small town in Ohio, or a sprawling metropolis like Sao Paulo, could browse the same endless catalog of trendy items. With just a few clicks on their smartphone, they could place an order and have a package arrive at their door in less than 2 weeks. This seamless, direct-to-consumer experience was revolutionary. It removed the friction and the waiting associated with international shopping, making global fashion feel as accessible and immediate as a local purchase. SHEIN wasn't just selling clothes, it was selling convenience and accessibility on an unprecedented scale. The company's explosion onto the global stage was a masterclass in silent conquest. While legacy brands were busy managing their expensive physical store footprints and complex regional distribution centers, SHEIN was operating as a nimble, borderless digital entity. It had no storefronts, no regional headquarters in the traditional sense, and a minimal public profile. It existed primarily on the phones of its millions of customers. This asset-light model allowed it to pour all its resources into its core strengths: data analysis, supply chain optimization, and aggressive digital marketing. The result was a global empire built not of bricks and mortar, but of clicks and code. The sheer scale of SHEIN's operation was a paradigm shift for the entire retail landscape. It was bigger than Zara, the Spanish giant that had pioneered the very concept of fast fashion. It was bigger than H&M, the Swedish powerhouse with a massive global presence. In many key markets, particularly among younger demographics, SHEIN's market share was not just larger than both of these legacy brands. It was bigger than both of them combined. This was not a gradual erosion of market share, it was a hostile takeover executed through algorithms and logistics. The old kings of fashion were being dethroned by an invisible empire that their customers carried in their pockets. The global expansion was fueled by a hyper-localized marketing strategy that felt personal to consumers in every country. SHEIN masterfully utilized armies of micro-influencers on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, turning fashion-conscious young people into brand evangelists. A #SHEIN haul video from an influencer in Germany would look different from one in Mexico or Thailand, tailored to local tastes and trends. This created an illusion of a local brand, even though the entire operation was centrally controlled from China. It was a brilliant tactic that allowed the company to penetrate hundreds of distinct cultural markets simultaneously, making its global brand feel native to everywhere it operated. The logistics behind this global reach were a modern marvel of supply chain engineering. Cargo planes filled with millions of individually wrapped packages crisscrossed the globe daily. Advanced sorting facilities, operating with machine-like precision, ensured that a dress ordered in Dubai and a top ordered in Dublin could be processed and shipped with astonishing speed. The company had effectively built its own private global postal service, optimized for one thing only: moving small, low-cost packages from its factories to individual doorsteps as quickly and cheaply as humanly possible. This infrastructure was the physical backbone of its digital dominance, the tangible manifestation of its global ambition. For the consumer, the experience was intoxicating. The barriers that once defined international commerce, high shipping costs, long delivery times, customs complications, seemed to melt away. The world of fashion, once dictated by a handful of Western capitals, was now available to anyone with a smartphone and a modest budget. SHEIN had democratized trend-driven fashion, putting it within reach of millions who had previously been excluded. A world wrapped in SHEIN was a world where distance no longer mattered, and the latest style was always just a few clicks and a few days away, a promise that proved irresistible to a generation of digital natives. So how did they achieve this unprecedented market domination so quickly? The secret was not in fashion but in technology. SHEIN operated less like a clothing retailer and more like a tech giant such as Google or Meta. Its primary asset was not its inventory or its designs, but the colossal amount of data it collected from its users every second of every day. The company built a system designed to track everything, every product view, every search query, every item added to a wish list, every abandoned cart, and of course, every purchase. This wasn't just market research, it was a live, continuous surveillance of consumer desire on a global scale. This data-centric approach gave SHEIN a formidable, almost unfair advantage over its rivals. While a brand like Zara had to rely on its store managers to file weekly reports on what was selling, a process that was inherently slow and anecdotal, SHEIN had a perfect real-time feed of information. Its system could detect minute shifts in consumer taste as they were happening, not weeks or months later. It knew that a specific TikTok video had caused a surge in searches for corset tops in North America, and it could have a new batch of similar designs in production within 24 hours. The feedback loop was immediate and absolute. This process was the fashion equivalent of owning a crystal ball. The company was not guessing what customers wanted, it knew. The millions of people using its app were unknowingly feeding this massive intelligence engine, providing the raw material for its next wave of products. The system could adjust the entire product line on the fly, promoting items that were gaining traction and pushing underperforming ones to the background. It was a dynamic, self-optimizing retail machine that was constantly learning and evolving, always one step ahead of both its customers and its competitors. It had effectively solved the biggest puzzle in fashion, the prediction of trends. This relentless data harvesting was the true engine of SHEIN's growth. It allowed the company to minimize risk, maximize sales, and create an illusion of being perfectly in sync with the zeitgeist. While competitors were placing big, risky bets on seasonal collections, SHEIN was making thousands of tiny, data-informed bets every single day. The cumulative effect was a business model that was not only faster, but also vastly more efficient and resilient. It wasn't just outcompeting other brands on price or style, it was outthinking them with a superior intelligence network that they had no way of replicating. Nowhere was the disruptive power of SHEIN's model more apparent than in its swift and decisive takeover of markets across the African continent. In South Africa, a country with a vibrant local fashion and retail scene, the brand's entry was less of an arrival and more of a shockwave. In what felt like the blink of an eye, SHEIN captured an astonishing 28% of the online apparel market. Local retailers, from established chains to small independent boutiques, were left reeling. They simply could not compete with the sheer velocity, the endless variety, and most critically, the impossibly low prices that SHEIN was offering to South African consumers. The impact was immediate and devastating for local businesses. Small clothing brands, designers, and manufacturers who had spent years building a customer base found themselves struggling to survive. They operated on longer production cycles, sourced materials locally at higher costs, and could never hope to match the thousands of new styles SHEIN introduced each week. Customers, facing economic pressures, were drawn to the allure of affordable, trendy clothing delivered directly to their door. The fight was fundamentally uneven. It was a battle between traditional brick-and-mortar businesses and a borderless digital behemoth. This pattern was repeated in various forms across the continent. In Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana, the distinctive SHEIN packages became a status symbol among young, digitally savvy consumers. The brand had successfully tapped into a massive youthful population eager for global fashion trends that were previously out of reach. For most of these customers, SHEIN existed only on their phones. They had never seen a SHEIN store, met a SHEIN employee, or seen a traditional advertisement. The brand's presence was entirely virtual, yet its impact on the local economic fabric was profoundly real and disruptive. This was more than just a story about fashion, it was a takeover. SHEIN's strategy demonstrated a new form of economic colonialism, one waged not with armies, but with algorithms and supply chains. It could enter a market, dominate it, and extract revenue without ever establishing a significant physical presence or investing in the local economy in a meaningful way. Small businesses were being wiped out by a competitor they couldn't see, a faceless global entity that had mastered the art of moving in silence. The explosion of choice for consumers came at a steep price for local industry. Behind the glittering facade of a $100 billion valuation and the lightning speed efficiency of its supply chain, a much darker reality began to emerge. The impossibly low prices and rapid production were not the result of some magical innovation alone. They were built on a foundation of human labor pushed to its absolute limits. As journalists and investigators started to peel back the layers of secrecy surrounding SHEIN's operations, they uncovered a disturbing picture. The brand that millions of consumers associated with affordable, carefree style was, for the people making the clothes, a symbol of grueling exhaustion and profound exploitation. The true cost of a $5 top was being paid by someone else. In 2022, a groundbreaking investigation by the BBC and other media outlets sent shockwaves through the industry. Reporters went undercover in Guangzhou, the heart of SHEIN's manufacturing network, gaining access to the unmarked workshops that churned out the company's garments. They found workers, many of them migrants from poorer provinces, toiling away in cramped, poorly ventilated conditions. The investigation revealed that many were clocking in for staggering 75-hour workweeks. They were often given only one day off per month, a brutal schedule that left little time for rest, family, or anything resembling a personal life. This was not just hard work, it was a system that demanded near-total devotion. The compensation for these punishing hours was shockingly low. Workers reported earning a pittance per garment, a model that forced them to work at a frantic pace just to earn a basic living. The pay was often so meager that it barely covered the essentials of food and rent in a major industrial city. This piece rate system created a high-pressure environment where every second counted, and any slowdown in production directly impacted a worker's ability to survive. The dream of affordable fashion for consumers was being subsidized by wages that kept its makers trapped in a cycle of poverty and relentless labor. This was the hidden engine of the SHEIN machine. The speed and low cost were not just algorithmic marvels, they were a direct consequence of a labor model that treated human beings as disposable cogs in a larger system. While customers celebrated their latest haul on social media, the people who stitched those clothes together were facing conditions that many would consider inhumane. SHEIN's success was inextricably linked to this shadow workforce, operating far from the public eye and the reach of regulatory oversight. The dark secret was out, the fabric of the empire was woven with exhaustion. The questions surrounding SHEIN's ethical practices did not stop at its factory floors. They extended deep into its supply chain, all the way to the fields where its raw materials were grown. A new, damning set of allegations emerged, linking the company's products to cotton sourced from the Xinjiang region of China. This region has become globally infamous due to widespread, credible reports of systematic human rights abuses, including the use of forced labor programs targeting the Uyghur population and other ethnic minorities. Suddenly, the conversation about SHEIN shifted from labor exploitation to potential complicity in modern-day slavery. Forced labor in Xinjiang is a state-sponsored system, documented by human rights groups, governments, and journalists. It involves the mass detention and forced transfer of minority populations to work in factories and fields against their will. As a major producer of cotton, the region's output is deeply embedded in the global textile supply chain. Any brand sourcing cotton from China faced a high risk of being tainted by these abuses. For a company as large and opaque as SHEIN, which produced garments at a colossal scale, the risk was particularly acute. The cheapness of its materials could no longer be seen as just a smart business practice. When confronted with these serious allegations, SHEIN's response was one of evasion and deflection. During hearings with the UK Parliament, company executives were pressed to provide clear answers about their supply chain and their processes for auditing cotton sourcing. Instead of transparency, they offered vague assurances and failed to directly address the core issue. They claimed to have a zero-tolerance policy for forced labor, but could not provide concrete evidence of how they enforce this within their vast and complex network of suppliers. For critics and lawmakers, This silence was not just suspicious, it was damning. It suggested a company unwilling or unable to confront the truth of its own supply chain. The Xinjiang cotton controversy added a grave new dimension to the case against SHEIN. It was no longer just a matter of overworked factory employees, it was about the potential use of materials produced under a system of brutal oppression. The stain of this association was difficult to wash away. It raised fundamental questions for consumers. Was the convenience of fast, cheap fashion worth the risk of supporting a system of forced labor? For many, the answer was a resounding no. The brand's carefully constructed image was beginning to unravel, revealing something deeply unsettling woven into its very threads. The questionable practices of the SHEIN empire were not limited to its supply chain. They were also deeply embedded in the customer-facing experience. The company's app and website were not just digital storefronts. They were masterful works of psychological engineering. Consumer advocacy groups began to raise alarms about SHEIN's use of so-called dark patterns. These are manipulative user interface design choices, intentionally crafted to trick or pressure users into making decisions they might not otherwise make. It was a strategy designed to override rational thought and trigger impulsive buying behavior, turning shopping into a compulsive, game-like activity. One of the most common tactics was the use of fake or misleading urgency cues. Shoppers were constantly bombarded with aggressive pop-ups and banners. A ticking countdown timer would declare a flash sale was ending in minutes, creating a frantic sense of pressure to buy immediately. In reality, these sales were often cyclical, restarting as soon as they ended. Low stock warnings like "only 3 left" would appear on popular items, manufacturing a sense of scarcity to provoke a fear of missing out. These were not innocent marketing tools, they were psychological triggers designed to short-circuit the user's decision-making process. The entire platform was built to foster a sense of addiction. The endless scroll of new products, the constant notifications about new markdowns, and the gamified reward systems with points and coupons all worked together to keep users engaged and spending. It transformed the act of shopping from a needs-based activity into a form of entertainment, a treasure hunt where the prize was a cheap thrill and a package at your door. This business model relied on fostering a continuous cycle of desire, purchase, and fleeting satisfaction, ensuring that customers would always come back for their next quick fashion fix. This wasn't just good marketing, it was a deliberate strategy of manipulation. SHEIN's interface was finely tuned to exploit cognitive biases, making it difficult for customers to browse casually or make considered choices. The goal was to make you buy, and to make you buy fast, before you had time to ask yourself if you really needed another dress or top. Even the customers who loved the brand were not safe from its questionable practices. They were the targets of a sophisticated digital system, engineered to turn their insecurities and impulses into profit, one urgent, non-refundable click at a time. The web of manipulative tactics extended beyond countdown timers and low stock alerts into the very pricing structure of the products themselves. The user interface was a minefield of dark patterns designed to confuse and mislead the consumer about the true value of what they were buying. One prominent example was the use of crossed-out original prices next to a much lower sale price. This created the illusion of a massive discount, suggesting the customer was getting an incredible deal. However, investigations revealed that these higher reference prices were often inflated or entirely fictitious. The item had never actually been sold at that price. This practice created a false sense of value, making the already low prices seem even more irresistible. A shopper might believe they were saving 70% on a dress, which would heavily influence their decision to purchase it. This wasn't an honest sale. It was a form of price deception, a tactic that would be illegal in many jurisdictions with stricter consumer protection laws. SHEIN leveraged its position as a cross-border e-commerce platform to operate in a gray area, applying these techniques on a global scale with little initial oversight from national regulators who were slow to catch up with the new digital marketplace. Furthermore, the checkout process itself was often designed to be confusing. Pre-selected options, such as shipping insurance or other small add-on fees, would be automatically added to the cart. While it was possible to opt out, the design made it easy to miss, nudging customers into paying for services they did not necessarily want or need. The path to purchase was streamlined and frictionless, but the path to reviewing and modifying an order was intentionally made more complex. Every element was optimized to maximize the final transaction value, often at the expense of genuine customer choice and transparency. Ultimately, the entire shopping experience was a carefully constructed illusion. It was an environment designed not to serve the customer, but to exploit them. From the manufactured urgency of the flash sales to the deceptive pricing and the confusing checkout, every step was a calculated move to drive impulsive consumption. For a company that presented itself as a champion of accessible fashion for the masses, its methods revealed a deep cynicism. The very people it claimed to empower were being systematically manipulated by an interface that was, from its very first click, designed for deception. As the controversies mounted, the scrutiny on SHEIN intensified, moving from journalists and activists to government regulators. The European Union, with its stringent consumer protection standards, was one of the first major governing bodies to take decisive action. The European Commission launched a probe into the safety of SHEIN's products, a move that threatened to undermine the very foundation of the company's appeal. If the clothes were not just unethically made but also unsafe to wear, the brand's image could suffer irreparable damage. The investigation focused on the chemical composition of the garments, particularly items intended for children, where safety standards are the highest. The findings were alarming. The Commission's investigation uncovered that some of SHEIN's clothing contained unsafe levels of hazardous chemicals. Substances like phthalates, which are used to soften plastics but are linked to serious health risks, were found in concentrations that exceeded the EU's legal limits. The presence of these chemicals in any product is a concern, but their discovery in children's shoes and apparel was a public relations nightmare. The brand that dressed millions of young people around the world was now being accused of selling them products that could potentially harm their health. The illusion of harmless, fun fashion was beginning to crack under regulatory pressure. Faced with concrete evidence and the threat of being barred from a massive market, SHEIN was forced to respond. The company publicly announced that it was taking swift action to address the issue. It pledged to sever ties with approximately 500 of its suppliers who had failed to meet its safety and quality standards. This was a significant move, intended to show regulators and the public that it was taking the matter seriously. It was an admission, however indirect, that its hyper-diffuse and loosely controlled supply chain had critical flaws that allowed dangerous products to slip through the cracks and into the hands of consumers. To bolster its public commitment, SHEIN also pledged to invest $15 million in enhancing its quality control systems. This money was earmarked for more rigorous product testing, better supplier audits, and improved safety protocols. While the sum seemed substantial, to a company generating tens of billions in revenue, it was a relatively small price to pay to manage a growing crisis. For regulators and critics, however, the damage to the company's credibility was already done. The incident revealed a disturbing gap between SHEIN's rapid growth and its ability to ensure the basic safety of the products it was selling at such a massive scale. The regulatory crackdown was not confined to product safety. Authorities across Europe began to scrutinize SHEIN's aggressive and often misleading business practices, resulting in a series of high-profile and costly penalties. In Italy, the competition authority took aim at the company's environmental marketing. Regulators fined SHEIN €1 million for greenwashing, citing its use of vague and unsubstantiated claims like eco-friendly and conscious. The brand was accused of misleading consumers into believing they were making a sustainable choice, when in reality, its entire business model was the epitome of disposable, environmentally damaging fast fashion. The fine was a clear signal that unsubstantiated green claims would not be tolerated. The financial blows continued to land. In France, authorities handed SHEIN a staggering €40 million penalty for deceptive pricing tactics. This was the largest fine ever issued in the country's history for such a case, a testament to the severity of the violations. The investigation confirmed what many customers had long suspected, that the original prices displayed on the site were often artificially inflated to create the illusion of a deep discount. This systematic deception was deemed a serious breach of consumer trust. The fast in SHEIN's fast fashion, it seemed, also applied to its fast and loose interpretation of pricing laws. These fines represented a new and significant challenge for the company. While it had previously operated in a kind of regulatory Wild West, national governments were now catching up. The penalties were not just a financial cost, they were a public indictment of SHEIN's core business strategies. Each fine chipped away at the brand's carefully cultivated image, exposing the manipulative tactics that underpinned its success. The company could no longer hide behind its status as a borderless digital entity. It was being held accountable by the very countries whose markets it had so aggressively penetrated, forcing it into a defensive posture. SHEIN's response was a familiar pattern of compliance and deflection. It paid the fines and issued statements promising to align its practices with local regulations. However, for a company of its size, these penalties, even in the tens of millions, were seen by many as simply the cost of doing business. The question remained whether these fines would lead to a fundamental change in behavior, or if they would be treated as a minor business expense in the relentless pursuit of global market domination. The trail of fines was growing, and with it, the pressure on the silent empire was becoming louder and more difficult to ignore. The legal troubles were not limited to Europe. SHEIN's practices also caught the attention of regulators in the United States, one of its largest and most lucrative markets. In California, a state known for its robust consumer protection laws, the company found itself facing legal action. The claims were familiar: allegations of false and misleading advertising, particularly concerning its pricing and promotional strategies. Furthermore, the company was accused of failing to be transparent about shipping times, leaving customers frustrated by unexpected and lengthy delays that contradicted the brand's promise of a fast and seamless experience. The case culminated in a settlement. SHEIN agreed to pay $700,000 to resolve the claims brought by the state of California. The company did not admit wrongdoing, as is common in such settlements, but the payment was a tacit acknowledgement of the problems. For a corporate giant with a valuation that once touched $100 billion, the sum was little more than pocket change. It was a minuscule fraction of its daily revenue, a rounding error on its vast balance sheet. However, the significance of the settlement was not in the dollar amount but in the precedent it set. This legal action in the United States served as another stark reminder that the empire was not as flawless or untouchable as it appeared. It demonstrated that even in a market where it had achieved massive popularity, its methods were coming under legal fire. The settlement added to a growing global pattern of regulatory pushback, creating a narrative of a company that repeatedly crossed legal and ethical lines in its quest for growth. Each fine and settlement, no matter how small, contributed to a mosaic of corporate misconduct that was becoming increasingly difficult for the public and investors to overlook. SHEIN treated these penalties as a manageable business expense, a necessary toll to be paid for operating at such a breakneck pace. The strategy appeared to be to absorb the financial hits, make minor adjustments where legally required, and continue its aggressive expansion without fundamentally altering its core model. The question was how long this approach could be sustained. As the fines accumulated and the negative headlines piled up, the company was being forced to confront a new reality. Its silent, unchecked growth was over. It was now operating in the spotlight, and the price of doing business was getting higher every day. Faced with mounting legal pressure and regulatory threats, SHEIN's strategy evolved. The company realized that simply paying fines and issuing press releases was not enough to protect its massive empire. If it wanted to continue its trajectory of unchecked growth, it needed to move beyond the commercial battlefield and into the corridors of political power. Instead of scaling back its controversial practices, SHEIN decided to scale up its influence, moving deeper into the world of politics. It began to build a shadow network designed to defend its interests, fight back against unfavorable legislation, and shape the rules of the game in its favor. This was a clear and calculated escalation. The company started by hiring a team of high-profile lobbyists in key political centers like Brussels and Washington, D.C. These were not junior operatives, they were seasoned political insiders with deep connections and an intimate understanding of how policy is made. In a particularly bold move, SHEIN retained the services of a former French interior minister, a heavyweight figure with immense political capital. The hiring was a powerful signal to European regulators. SHEIN was no longer a distant, faceless e-commerce entity. It was now a sophisticated political operator, willing to spend heavily to ensure its voice was heard in the highest echelons of government. The objective of this new political playbook was clear: to preemptively neutralize threats to its business model. The lobbyists were tasked with combating proposed regulations that could impact everything from its labor practices and supply chain transparency to environmental standards and digital marketing tactics. They worked to reframe the narrative around SHEIN, portraying it not as a problematic corporate actor, but as an innovator providing value to millions of consumers. It was a classic influence campaign executed with the same ruthless efficiency that defined its commercial operations. The company was now targeting lawmakers with the same precision it used to target shoppers. This pivot from a purely commercial entity to a political player marked a new chapter in the SHEIN saga. It demonstrated a level of strategic ambition that went far beyond selling clothes. The company understood that in the modern global economy, true power lies not just in market share, but in the ability to shape the laws that govern the market. SHEIN was no longer content to simply operate within the existing rules. It was now actively working to rewrite them. Its network of influence was growing, moving silently through the halls of power, a shadow force working to protect the silent empire. The ultimate goal for many of SHEIN's investors was a massive initial public offering, a move that would crystallize its enormous valuation into tangible wealth. The initial plan was to list the company on a major Western stock exchange, with London being a primary target. A London listing would offer immense prestige, access to a deep pool of capital, and the legitimacy that comes with being vetted by one of the world's most respected financial markets. However, SHEIN's growing list of controversies, from labor abuses to regulatory fines, had created a significant obstacle. The company was becoming too toxic for the City of London. Regulators and lawmakers in the United Kingdom raised serious concerns. The intense scrutiny that precedes a London IPO would force SHEIN to open its books and its supply chain to a level of transparency it had always avoided. Questions about its labor practices, its links to Xinjiang cotton, and its corporate governance would be unavoidable. The risk of the IPO being rejected or becoming a public relations disaster was simply too high. The very secrecy that had fueled SHEIN's rise was now its biggest liability. The A-list financial centers of the West, it turned out, came with a price SHEIN was unwilling to pay: accountability. Rather than clean up its act to meet the stringent standards of London or New York, SHEIN executed a strategic pivot. The company quietly shifted its IPO ambitions eastward to Hong Kong. While still a major global financial hub, a Hong Kong listing was perceived as a path of less resistance. The regulatory environment was seen as more favorable, with a lower likelihood of politically charged questions about its ethical record derailing the process. It was a move that would still allow the company to raise billions of dollars from global investors, but without the same level of intense Western oversight and public shaming. This strategic shift was a telling move. It showed that when faced with a choice between transparency and capital, SHEIN would choose the path that best preserved its operational status quo. The pivot to Hong Kong was a tacit admission that the company could not withstand the ethical scrutiny of Western markets. It was a move designed to secure its financial future while keeping its darkest secrets safely in the shadows. The great IPO pivot was not just a financial decision, it was a clear statement about the company's priorities, valuing its secrecy above all else. While the media and regulators in Europe and North America were preoccupied with SHEIN's fines and IPO drama, the company was already executing its next major expansion. True to its nature, the move was made quietly and with incredible speed. The empire was pushing aggressively into a new frontier: Latin America. This vast and youthful market, with a rapidly growing e-commerce sector, represented a colossal opportunity for growth. As critics in the West debated the ethics of SHEIN's business model, the company was already busy conquering its next continent, proving it could absorb criticism in one part of the world while simultaneously capturing markets in another. To lead this monumental charge, SHEIN brought in a true corporate titan, Marcelo Clore. A former top executive at SoftBank, one of SHEIN's major investors, Clore was a powerhouse figure with deep connections and extensive experience in the Latin American market. His appointment as the head of SHEIN's Latin American operations was a masterstroke. It gave the company instant credibility and a seasoned leader who knew exactly how to navigate the region's unique economic and political landscapes. Clore was tasked with replicating SHEIN's global success, building out local supply chains, and cementing the brand's dominance before local competitors even knew what hit them. The strategy in Latin America involved a more localized approach. In countries like Brazil and Mexico, SHEIN began investing in local manufacturing hubs. This was partly a move to shorten delivery times and navigate complex import tariffs, but it was also a savvy public relations strategy. By creating local jobs and partnerships, the company could present itself as a partner in economic development, blunting the criticisms that had plagued it elsewhere. It was a more sophisticated version of its global takeover plan, adapted to preemptively address accusations of being a purely extractive foreign entity. This quiet conquest of Latin America demonstrated the relentless, forward-moving nature of the SHEIN machine. The company did not pause or retreat in the face of controversy. It simply opened up a new front. While its ethics were being fiercely debated in one hemisphere, its packages were already flooding the doorsteps of another. The appointment of Marcelo Clore and the push into local production showed a company that was constantly learning, adapting and evolving its playbook for global domination. The shadow network of influence was not just political, it was expanding across entire continents, always moving in silence. SHEIN's journey from a small Nanjing storefront to a global fashion colossus is a defining story of our digital age. It is a narrative built on a series of profound contradictions. It is an empire of unprecedented speed, yet one that was constructed in deliberate silence. It offers a dream of democratic fashion, making the latest trends accessible to millions. Yet this dream is subsidized by the grueling labor of an underpaid and overworked workforce. The brand champions an almost infinite variety of choice for the consumer, but this choice is often guided by manipulative psychological tactics, engineered to drive impulsive and continuous consumption. It is a story of dazzling technological innovation that exists alongside deeply troubling ethical questions. This is the fundamental tension at the heart of the SHEIN phenomenon. Its success forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own values as consumers in a globalized world. Are we willing to accept the hidden human and environmental costs in exchange for a $5 dress? The company's model exposes the fault lines in global capitalism, where the demand for ever cheaper goods and ever faster delivery creates immense pressure on the supply chain, often with devastating consequences for laborers and the planet. SHEIN did not invent these problems, but its hyper-efficient, data-driven system has amplified them to a scale never before seen, forcing a global reckoning. The empire continues its relentless march forward, pivoting to new markets like Latin America and shifting its financial strategies to evade the scrutiny of Western regulators. It wields political influence and sophisticated PR to control its narrative, all while its algorithms continue to churn, turning fleeting online trends into tangible products shipped to every corner of the globe. The story is far from over. The ongoing debates around regulation, labor rights, and consumerism will continue to shape SHEIN's future, and in turn, the future of the entire retail industry. The brand has become more than just a clothing company. It is a case study in 21st century power. Ultimately, SHEIN is a mirror reflecting our modern desires and their complex consequences. It reflects our love for a bargain, our appetite for newness, and our embrace of digital convenience. But it also reflects what we are willing to ignore. The story of SHEIN is a story of algorithms and political muscle, of ambition and exploitation, a business model built on the twin pillars of speed and silence. As consumers, regulators, and global citizens, the challenge is to look past the impossibly low prices and the endless scroll, and to truly understand the full, intricate, and often dark price of the empire you were never meant to see. You've just watched Money Moves in Silence. Hit like, subscribe, and comment what shocked you most. And next week, we expose the billionaire powering the AI you use every day.